Hello again, Steve here with a few comments roughly surrounding the idea of feminism versus humanism. Now, it starts out with a bit of a story, which is that somebody I know, who I respect actually for his intellect and his ability to have achieved great successes in his life and so on. I was talking to him about a year ago, less than a year ago probably, and he mentioned to me that he was a feminist, which was kind of, I almost thought it was a joke at first, actually. But no, he was serious. He was a feminist. And this seems to be a thread that's running through the consciousness of many people these days, that men can be feminists and should be feminists. And he was a little bit appalled that I wouldn't consider myself to be a feminist. So I jokingly piped back at him and said, well, actually, maybe I'm a masculinist. I just made it up. Never heard anybody ever say that before. But I said, no, seriously. I said, because I asked him why was he a feminist, and he said, well, he was in support of women's rights and women should have equality, women shouldn't be abused and all that. And I said, well, being a man, you don't have to negate all of that stuff if you're a man and if you stand for masculine values. I mean, one of the things that men of virtue, anyways, have traditionally done and protected women and children, right? Protected women and children. So that's a good thing to aspire to, I would say. Now, but which this leads me to a little bit of the reason I thought of this idea of talking about this is because I'm reading this book now. It's called True Humanism. It's a very old book, actually, and I was very fortunate to find it in my dad's stash. It's actually signed by my dad in 1949, but written back in, I think, the 30s or something like that. But it's written by a guy named Jacques Maritain. And you can find it online and use bookstores and stuff, but it's a fascinating read. And it's along the lines, I would say, of what Jordan Peterson is talking about, in a way, although a little bit more religious than that. Well, pretty much all the books my dad had were religious, but this is an interesting look at another way of looking at humanism. He separates it out, and I'm just starting the book really, but I saw amazing parallels between this book and the previous book, no surprise, also from my dad's stash, called The Origins of Totalitarian Democracy. Or wait a minute, I'm not sure. No, that was from his stash, I'm pretty sure as well. And which is that he sees where this comes from, where the humanism, what he calls anthropocentric humanism, whereas it's centered upon man, right? As opposed to theological humanism. And he sees it starting out with guys like Descartes, and then it goes on to Rousseau, and then Kant and Hegel and Marx, and then it ends up in communism, which is built upon class struggles, right? Which is where we see feminism coming out of, especially second waves and so on of feminism, and third waves and so on, which is to say, we're oppressed and you guys are oppressing us, which is the same old story as the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and all that sort of stuff, right? And whereas, and it starts, he makes the case where he sees this starting, whereas you start with guys like Descartes and that, they didn't throw out the idea of God. But what they began this idea that the separation of man and God, and man as this eventually as this wretched being, basically, which is what the Protestantism and so on came out of, or eventually saw it as, right? This very much focus on the sin of man and the wretchedness of man. So therefore, it has to be cured, right? And communism becomes the embodiment of that. We have to create this new man because man is fundamentally flawed in the way he is. And flows right through. So he sees this coming through the Renaissance, and he sees this coming through the Reformation. And I just thought I would point that out. I just thought I would have a little bit of not so much of a discussion about this, but just to let you guys know about this book if you haven't heard about it. Just because I think where it's going, I think it will be an interesting read, because it flies in the face of the importance that the atheists put on this rejection of God, right? And it's very Catholic in its theological sense, which is that the Catholic theological sense, at least what I grew up with, was not whether God or Jesus or whatever was historically true, it's what can we learn from it? Where is this coming from? What does it matter to man, right? Because he talks about here that in this earlier sense, because he talks about that in terms of the Christian medieval times. The Christian was ensconced within the grace of God. Grace and freedom, in one way, they seem like opposites, because it seems like determinism and free will are intermelded. But what he's saying is that, it seems to be saying is that man at the time of the Middle Ages sort of organically or naturally saw them as a blend of together. There was no disconnect whatsoever. Whereas when these guys like Descartes and Rousseau and started coming along and whatnot, they started to separate that out to the point where, who was it? Friedrich Nietzsche eventually said, that God is now dead, right? And when that got quoted, that was celebrated by the atheists, but they forgot the second part of what he was saying, which is that no amount of water or whatever will ever wash away the blood that will flow from this, because he saw that this was extremely dangerous, because it was like this idea of connection with something greater than oneself was what was at the basis of virtue and at the basis of civilization, at the basis of decency and sort of a tempering of vice within humanity. And when you rip that out, it's like you rip a major organ out of the cultural society, and you don't know where it'll go. And before I read any of this sort of stuff, but just in terms of thinking about it, this is a book that I wrote a while ago, Coffee Chat. I ran a coffee chat group in the city here for a number of years. It is available now if you go to innergenie.com, and you could find it through Lulu. I'm on a link there. But I have this image here of my conception of how this interconnection takes place. Man is on this line, right? The equality of, at least on a level playing field, most of us. And then it's connected to the great unknown, the great creator, in a way. And then we create everything below, right? And so the medieval man saw us, and this is just, I'm coming up with this now, based on reading this, but they saw there was their natural way of thinking, that there was no separation, they were completely connected, through the grace of God in a way. Whereas in the all the way forward to the communists, and you see it today, it's craziness. People have they've descended into hell of their own making. They have created entities, governments, and licenses, and all this sort of stuff, and they descend down, because they descend. Why I say it's descending down is because it's what they created. So what we create is less than us. It's like down from us. We descend down into that and embody what we created, and we create the beast of our own downfall. And that's why I think it's important in terms of a metaphysical or a way of thinking, that if we are created and we didn't create ourselves, then, putting aside all the imagery of bearded guys in the sky and Mohammed and all this sort of stuff, it's not known what it is, if we're honest. But there's still creative forces there, and it's this acknowledgement of that, this sort of a faith in it, right? Because we don't know it, is what I think is very empowering into our deep psychological sort of comfort zone, which helps us, I think. I would actually love to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson about this after reading this. He's a little bit higher in terms of, I'm sure he's got interviews lined up from here to years in advance for sure by now. But it'd be great to have a discussion with him if he's read this book, because I see Peterson's theology or whatever as very similar to intellectual Catholic theology, or Anglican or Episcopalian or something like that. So he's probably read some of these kind of books like this. Anyway, just wanted to put that out there and to food for thought. Nothing else. No answers here or whatever, but hope this is helpful. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and comment in the box below. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye for now.